ABC General Hospital, spoilers, are saying that Michael probably never would have guessed Valentine's Day, which was supposed to be a nice night, a fresh start even, would end up being the absolute worst moment of his whole life. He'd spent what felt like forever planning the evening for Jacinda, really pushing through all his doubts and insecurities. Even with all the baggage from the investigation into Drew's shooting hanging over him, he just wanted this night to be perfect. He kept telling himself that even when things were a mess, love could still find a way. He felt like he deserved a little happiness, and that Jacinda, she deserved someone who would really give it their all. But life took a turn he really wasn't ready for. It was tougher and more painful than he could have imagined. When Michael stepped into the restaurant, a knot of nerves formed in his stomach. It wasn't Jacinda that made him anxious. It was everything else, all those questions nobody was answering, the rumors about new evidence, and Dante's quiet warnings that things were picking up speed way faster than they'd thought. But Michael still pushed it aside. He looked at Jacinda's smile, the delicate hope shining in her eyes, and how she seemed to be checking if he was actually someone she could trust. For what felt like ages, Michael finally took a breath. He let himself think it was true. He reached across the table, his fingers almost touching hers, and the night finally felt like it might go somewhere nice. Then the restaurant doors flew open and everything just broke. The officers came in all in uniform and looking very serious, and just like that, the whole room went quiet. Folks literally stopped talking mid-sentence. Everyone paused, their forks still in the air. Jacinda froze, a puzzled look, slowly washing over her face. And Michael, he just knew, before the officer even said his name before reading the warrant, he just knew his worst nightmare had finally caught up to him. No escape, no talks, no time. The officers walked up to the table and Jacinda's eyes went wide. She looked disbelieving, scared, and something else all at once. Maybe it was betrayal. Or maybe she was realizing that her deepest worries about caring for someone messed up were coming true. Michael opened his mouth to say something, but then felt the cold metal against his wrists. There was no time to speak. The handcuffs clicked, and it sounded like the end of everything. Jacinda clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes welling up, but she wouldn't let the tears drop. The candles, the soft music, and the perfectly set table, which should have made everything romantic, just made the humiliation feel even worse. Michael felt everyone watching him, heard every little whisper, and with each one, he felt a bit of himself just fade away. The officers pulled him from his chair, and just like that, the future he'd pictured a few minutes before, a wide open, hopeful one, with Jacinda right there with him, blinked out of existence. Walking to the restaurant, he caught bits and pieces of hushed, surprised talks. He heard folks whisper about the Corinthos name, the shooting, and all the guilt and consequences that came with it. But the only thing he really heard was Jacinda's shaky voice calling his name. It sounded like she wasn't just confused, but truly hurt. The flashing red and blue police lights made the street look like something out of a crime movie. They shoved Michael into the back seat, and that's when he felt it, a real fear he hadn't known even once the investigation started. It wasn't about jail or what people would think. It was the crushing thought of losing everything he'd worked so hard to keep safe and sound. Watching Jacinda go would just be heartbreaking. He was just really scared of losing who he was. Valentine's Day, which is supposed to be all about love, just became a painful reminder that Michael could never really outrun his past no matter how much he tried. Every choice he'd made before tonight just felt so much heavier, each one playing a part in the mess that was happening all around him. To make matters worse, he knew the rest was just the start. The real danger was still out there, meaning interrogations, evidence he couldn't quite wrap his head around, getting framed, the fear that he was deliberately set up by somebody. That night was so much worse than just being embarrassed. It was like a really clear sign that he'd somehow stumbled into a much bigger fight without even knowing it. Jacinda, all by herself at the table now, was probably going back over every single talk they'd ever had, trying to spot any clue she might have overlooked. Michael could just picture her hands shaking, the plate of food sitting there, not even touched, and all those strangers looking at her with pity in their eyes. He really hated that he'd pulled her into this mess. As the police car drove off and the restaurant got smaller in the distance, Michael realized something important. It wasn't just about showing he was innocent anymore. This was a matter of survival, plain and simple. The whole thing with Drew getting shot was getting scarier and scarier, really messing with Michael in ways he never saw coming. He was right in the middle of everything now. The night he thought would open his heart just ended up opening a whole new battlefield instead. Valentine's Day stopped being about love and romance. That's the moment it all went downhill, something no one would forget. Michael stared out the police car window, his jaw clenched, heart thumping. He knew right then he'd get himself out of this whatever it took. If he didn't, the damage would go way beyond him. Jacinda was already caught in the fallout whether she liked it or not. Even after Michael was dragged from the restaurant, Jacinda remained frozen in shock. Her mind raced with disjointed thoughts, unable to make sense of anything. One second, she was looking into Michael's eyes, feeling that warmth you get from someone who's finally letting you in. And the next, he was in handcuffs being led away like he was a criminal. The sheer terror of it stuck to her skin like a second layer. So cold and tight, it felt like she couldn't even take a full breath. The whispers from all the tables around felt like jabs, each curious looked like an accusation. And by the time she finally got out onto the street, her whole body just shook. Jacinda was always the careful one, always had one foot ready to bolt when things got too emotional. But watching Michael get pulled into that police car, that sparked something fierce in her. And she suddenly just couldn't let this be the end, no way. She had no idea about the legal system or how far this investigation went. But one thing was absolutely clear to her, Michael needed help and she wasn't about to abandon him. Not right now. Not really. When she first got to Port Charles, her immediate thought was to ring Ezra. He was the only one who had been really kind to her, and he just got how crazy this town could be, particularly when he found yourself mixed up with the Corinthos family. Ezra knew something was up the second he picked up the phone and heard her voice wavering. She didn't even get all the way through her story before he was telling her he'd be there. She really needed his quiet, strong presence. It wasn't that she thought Michael was guilty at all. It was more like she needed someone to think clearly when her feelings were about to completely overwhelm her. But even Ezra couldn't fix what Jacinda was really up against. This wasn't just some mix-up or a small legal problem. This was Michael Corinthos, and his name came with power, loyalty, and enemies who never fought fair. And Michael was in trouble. He needed help Ezra just couldn't give. That's what led Jacinda right to Sunny and Carly, the last two people she ever thought she'd go to for help. She always kept her distance from them, really. Their reputation, their past, and just how strong they were when they were around it all kind of intimidated her. Now, making sure Michael was safe was the most important thing. She needed them, not because they were big shots in Port Charles, but because they were the parents who loved him more than anyone on earth. Jacinda showed up at Carly's place, and for a second the words just wouldn't come out. Her voice was all shaky, her eyes were super red, and she just couldn't get her words out straight as she tried to tell us what went wrong that night. Carly had been through a lot of tough situations, probably more than anyone else, so she jumped right to it. She put her hand firmly on Jacinda's shoulder, reassuring her they'd work it out as a team. And then Jacinda felt a kind of acceptance she never saw coming. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She cared about Michael, and that put her right in the middle of things, part of the fight. Sunny reacted differently. His anger and need to protect made him sharper. But even he eased up when he saw Jacinda shaking. He could tell she was serious since she kept looking at him and didn't even try to look away, even though it would have been easy. And Sunny really respected that. Jacinda had just shown him something big. Whether she meant to or not, she wouldn't bail when things got tough. She was someone who stayed. Jacinda ended up in a situation she never thought she'd be in, right at the heart of things. Ezra was there giving her real hands-on advice. Carly kept her steady with her strong will, grounding her when things got chaotic. And Sunny, he was all about the plan, thinking clearly and coolly because he really got what was at stake. She kept her eyes on the prize through everything. Her one goal was to get Michael out of jail, even if it felt impossible. Even with all the fear, confusion, and chaos around her, a spark of something new started up inside her. Love. This time it wasn't the tentative, careful sort she'd offered up in the past. This was something different entirely, something fiery, all-encompassing, and solid. The kind of love that didn't just vanish when times got tough, it actually got stronger. It just needed to be addressed. That feeling just melted away, all the what-ifs she had about opening up to Michael. Meanwhile, Michael was stuck in a freezing interrogation room, bracing himself for trouble he never expected. He had no clue that outside Jacinda was really going all out for him, fighting a battle like never before. That fear she felt, it just kind of switched into pure determination. And all that confusion she had, gone replaced by real clarity. Even that bit of uncertainty hanging around turned into this incredibly strong love. Strong enough to change everything that came after. This whole messy situation, instead of breaking them, was actually becoming the thing that really showed what they were made of. A big turning point neither of them saw coming, but it just went to show how perfectly their hearts were in tune. Jacinda wasn't scared of the danger. She wasn't avoiding it at all. She was headed right for it. Just for him. Jacinda never thought she'd get to a point where she was so desperate she'd have to tell her secret. Something she'd kept hidden for years. It was buried so deep that just saying it out loud felt like someone was ripping open her ribs. With Michael behind bars and the whole city buzzing about him as if he were a bad omen, Jacinda felt her heart breaking from all the fear. It was then she realized there was nothing else she could do. She was in a tough spot and really needed some serious help, the kind that could change everything. Only one person in Port Charles could maybe make big things happen for her, but that meant she had to actually tell them what was going on. Nina. That idea really scared her. Nina was bright, intense, and a real roller coaster of emotions, totally unpredictable. She was the type of woman who could either make Jacinda's life wonderful or just shatter what little she had left. But family is family. Eventually, Jacinda just couldn't carry that burden by herself anymore. To even dream of helping Michael, she had to face the very storm she'd spent her entire life running from. Jacinda stood there right outside Nina's office, chest all tight, hands freezing, barely breathing. She just knew that the second she opened that door, everything in her life would be different. Nothing would ever go back to how it was. When she finally got inside, Nina looked up, surprised. She clearly hadn't expected visitors, especially not someone shaking with feelings she just couldn't hold back anymore. Nina went from confused to worried, and that's when Jacinda finally broke. She spilled it all out, bits and pieces of her life, her childhood, the lies she'd been fed, then the truth she somehow found. There was this DNA test she'd kept secret. And then that last quiet, crushing sentence that made Nina gasp, clutching her desk, "I'm your daughter. Your goal should be to give it your best shot. We want to see what you can do. It's pretty challenging, but you'll learn a lot even if you don't nail it on the first try. Just remember to always do what you can. You might surprise yourself." When it was all over, the quiet was deafening. Just like what's left behind after a bomb goes off, ringing in your ears and throwing you off balance. Nina stared at her, her eyes wide and shiny, like she was trying to figure out what happened in a world that just turned upside down. Jacinda figured Nina would be mad, or maybe even refuse to believe her, or just be in shock. But nope, Nina just kind of shuffled closer, her hands all shaky, reaching out to Jacinda, like she thought Jacinda might vanish into thin air. Then, all at once, they felt this old, raw kinship, like it had always been there. Jacinda wasn't here to mend past hurts or forge new ties, at least not yet. She showed up because Michael was a mess. She really needed Nina to step in, use her contacts, exert her authority. She told me all about it, the arrest, what they said happened, and the complete mess after their Valentine's dinner got ruined. Nina really listened, not like some stranger, but like a mom who suddenly realized her own daughter was going through something awful and horrible. But as Jacinda talked, she knew she was keeping something else to herself. A truth she'd been too scared to even think about. She figured saying what she had to say tonight would be the toughest thing she'd ever done. She was simply wrong. When she whispered what came next, it made everything go sideways for a second. "I'm pregnant." "It's Michael's baby." Nina just froze. She couldn't breathe, stuck somewhere between being shocked and totally amazed. This new info didn't just up the ante, it blew the whole thing sky high. Suddenly, this wasn't just a love story hitting a rough patch. This was a hand down of caution. What was to come, all bound to the Corinthos family in ways that could rattle Port Charles to its core. Jacinda was doing more than just trying to get Michael out of prison. She was fighting for the guy who fathered her baby. She was fighting to keep the baby a tiny life inside her that somehow linked everyone in this whole mess of power. Danger and love. The room just wasn't big enough for what we just learned. Nina covered her mouth, totally taken aback. It wasn't just the thought of being a mom again. It was a chilling understanding that her own grandchild was now in danger because of everything happening with Michael. Then something fierce woke up in her. That's intense. There was this deep need to protect Jacinda and the baby from anything bad, no matter what it was. The confession started something neither woman could stop. Nina made a promise to Jacinda that she would help her out no matter what. She was ready to take on the police, fight the legal system, or even go head to head with anyone who threatened her family, who she just found out about. For Jacinda, though, what was going on inside her felt like an even bigger emotional explosion. All that fear, the feeling of being so vulnerable, and the love she just couldn't fight anymore from Michael. For the baby, they were going to have it all hit her at the same time. Things were just spinning out of control. It felt like everything was getting worse and worse, really dangerous, and impossible to rein in. And in all that mess, one thing was absolutely clear. Jacinda wasn't giving up. Not for herself. Not if it concerned her child. Not Michael, no. Things mattered more now. Now everything was on the line.